Welcome to the electronic version of Second Tuesday, because we are the Second Tuesday Hypnosis Group. It is the second Tuesday of the month, and it's right about 8 o'clock. And here we are, and it's so wonderful to see so many people at this meeting. It's 39 people as it is. Who knows, somebody else might come in when they figure out which buttons to push to get coming over here. We'll still bring people in, but it's just a wonderful thing that we have this asset for us to bring everybody together, even though we're supposed to stay home in our own homes. And if this is one of the little blessings in all this, if we were just meeting at the Y, then we wouldn't have everybody that we have here. I know Gus is far away, and Emmett we haven't seen for a long time, and some other names down the way. They're the ones up in the corner here. Other people we haven't seen for a long time, and we've got a lot of new people, and it's just wonderful that everybody's here. In these times of real craziness, it's some very sad things that are going on, but if you look for them, there's many beautiful things going on, and we need to look to those and bring that joy into our hearts to keep, as Larry says, keep our immune system up, and we keep our immune system strong, then we'll be okay. We'd be smart when we go out. We just have to hold our breath the whole time or something like that. What I'd like everybody to do, though, before we get further along, is to think of something that brings joy to you. If you smile, just smiling helps build your immune system. It helps shift the chemistry in your brain that brings good chemistry to your body. That simple smile. So if you think for a moment of something that will make you smile, will bring some joy to you, then I want you to take a deep breath and bring it in. Fill your lungs, breathe it in, and let your eyes close over and think of that good feeling. Just a moment, that's all you got to do. Just think a moment and then let that breath out. Just let it all out. And remember why we're here, besides listening to Fred, but we're coming together with all this good energy of like-minded individuals. And when we come from the heart, we're doing good work for, even if we're just hanging out. If we come from the heart, we're doing good works. So our speaker today, which everybody knows because they've shown up, everybody, look at this, 41 people we've got now in the room. It's great. It's a record. Fred has broken the record. But Fred is coming to us to talk about mirroring hands, and he'll explain all of that, mirroring hands. But he started out as a special ed teacher in his career path, and then he's been a business owner, and he came to hypnosis as a client, and probably many people here have come to hypnosis by way of being a client first and realizing the empowerment that we get from good hypnosis and stuff. So he's done that. He has studied and has many certifications for a whole variety of things, and one of which is the releasement therapy that I teach. He's one of my students, and he's also a Jungian student. He's been a student of the Jungian work for a long time, and we've shared a lot of different things with that. I think of Fred as a professor. He brings great wisdom in a quiet sense of strength that a lot of speakers don't have. And I've heard him speak right here at the Leaning Tower, and I've heard him speak at the conference both. It's a joy and an honor to have him speak tonight. And we'll learn all kinds of good stuff. So I'm going to turn this over to Fred. I've got to unmute him since he's going to speak. And let's see, there we go. We unmute him. And then I've got to do another little thing that will make him the spotlight video. So he should come up big on your screen.
There we are.
Well, so there you are. Thank you very much all for coming. And we'll turn it over to Fred. Thanks again. And bless you all. That's great. Thanks.
Good. Well,
Fred,
thank
it's all
you.
yours.
Thank you so much, Don, for that wonderful introduction, which I hope to make myself worthy of. But did you say I would, now if anyone speaks German here, did you say I was a professor or a Brotfresser? If you speak German, you'll get the joke. But I do thank you, and it's really delightful to be here, and I have a few things I want to share with you that I think most of you will find rather interesting, because we're going to become involved in a demonstration of mirroring hands, since that, I think, is the ideal way of showing what it is. We could talk about it in the abstract, which I will. And yet, even when we demonstrate and we'll all participate, there'll be very little talk going on, because mirroring hands is an approach to therapy that is very personal. It does not involve the therapist telling the client what to do or leading him, but rather the therapist functions as a facilitator. It's based on the idea that, given the opportunity and the right circumstances, the system, that is the internal system of an individual, will move toward a state of well-being. And the best way for that to happen is for the therapist to minimize to minimize what he says and does, so as not to adversely or negatively influence the client along a path which might make sense for the therapist, but which would have very little bearing on the issue that the client wants to resolve. So that's one essence of mirroring hands, theoretically, that the system will move, and that would apply to all systems, tend to move toward well-being. Now, I have a little handout here, which I would give you a copy of if we were sitting there in person. But instead, I'm going to see if I can pull it up here on the screen. Let me see here. Do it as a screen share. Okay, do we have it now? Can you, Don, can you see it? Can you see the key elements of mirroring hands? I think I've lost audio.
Is this something that could be emailed to us?
Yes, I was going to mention that. I will be happy to email you. I have three or four handouts, and I'll be happy to email them to you, so you can refer to them later.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll put the contact information on the screen also a little later. So if you look at the top here of the page, I have a direct quote from Milton Erickson. Now, most of us who are involved in hypnosis, either as enthusiasts or as practicing hypnotists, will have heard of Erickson, who really revolutionized hypnosis around the middle part of the 20th century by offering a completely different view than the formal view, or the more formalized view of hypnosis. And I think and mirroring hands is based on his approaches and his ideas. Now, I have a quote at the top of the page, which is a direct quote from Milton Erickson that was given to me by a gentleman who I took some courses with that you may also know of, Rob McNeely, who comes out of Australia. And he was a student of Erickson's in the mid-70s, having come there with no knowledge at all of hypnosis. And his life was changed as a result of meeting Erickson. And he told me that these were Erickson's words, and I think it crystallizes the essence of the Ericksonian approach, and therefore of the mirroring hands approach, which is derived from it. And it says that when a client comes to see you, they always bring their solution with them, only they don't know that. So you, the therapist, you should have a very nice time talking with your clients and helping them to find the solution that they've brought with them that they didn't realize they brought. Okay? Let that sink in for a moment. To some people, it may come as a new concept. To others, it may be something they've already heard. But I think it bears thinking about, because it is what I said, that the answers that the client is looking for are to be found within himself. And when a client comes to you in what you could describe as a disrupting state of consciousness, your job as the therapist, and I'm using that as a generic term for hypnotherapist or whatever kind of therapy you may use, when a client comes to you from a point of a disrupting consciousness, your job is to bring him to a therapeutic consciousness and then to move on to an integrating consciousness where his system has moved toward well-being, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. I hope that all makes sense. So what are the key elements of mirroring hands? Okay, before I answer that, I want to say that mirroring hands was developed by Ernie Rossi, who was the primary collaborator with Milton Erickson. And Rossi is still living. He's in his mid-80s. He's still very active. He's in California. And he developed this system of utilizing one's hands as a means of putting a person in contact with their, what I call their inner potential, based on what he had observed in many years as a therapist. He was originally a Jungian therapist for many years. And then he got involved with Erickson, and he co-authored some books, and he did all kinds of wonderful things all around the idea of the mind and body connection. And to develop mirroring hands further and to broadcast it to a larger audience, about 5 or 6 years ago, he began working with Richard Hill, who is the primary person now who teaches mirroring hands. And he also is a psychotherapist, an extremely accomplished individual who also operates out of Australia. And I'll have some contact information about him for those who want to perhaps learn a little more about mirroring hands than I am able to show you this evening. So what are the key elements? Okay, the key elements in mirroring hands are, I have four or five different elements, or three. What do I have? 5 different key elements. The first is that you want to create a therapeutic consciousness. So by a therapeutic consciousness, I'm going back to what I said before. You want to create that consciousness that will enable the client to move toward a state of well-being and to move away from that disrupting consciousness. So you do that by focusing his attention. What is that? That's essentially a hypnotic induction. And in mirroring hands, the first thing you do is the hands are held out, and we'll do this later. And the client is asked to look and to study his hands. As he does that, he goes into a hypnotic state. And as that starts to flow, then what you want to do is encourage him to be very curious, about what might happen or what could happen as a result of this, to think about the issue that he wants to, or if he doesn't have a specific issue, just to open himself to what might be coming through there, something to wonder about, to think about, to play with, to not go in with any preconceived ideas, but to just let everything start to flow together, with curiosity being the most important aspect. And then to have nascent or confidence or inborn confidence that something good can happen. Something good can happen from this. And I'm reminded of, there used to be a TV preacher, I forget which one of those guys, and something he said all the time that stuck with me, even though I certainly didn't agree with everything. He used to say, something good is going to happen to you today. And I thought that was a wonderful catchphrase. And that's what we want the client to begin to feel. This applies to any kind of hypnosis that we're doing. So to be confident, to be curious, to be focused, and it brings to mind the famous hypnotist whose name escapes me at the moment now. Oh, I can't think of the name, but he would speak of selective attention, pushing everything away that is irrelevant and to become focused on the experience. So that's what we're doing there. The next element in mirroring hands is the idea of activating what Rossi called the NNNE, the novelty numinosum neurogenesis effect. In other words, activating the change in the actual physical brain of an individual when that individual begins to grow and change. First, he's attracted by whatever it is that's going to come into his field of attention. And this creates a numinosum, or like a wondrous feeling of wonderfulness, maybe almost a religious feeling. And as you get into that deeper and deeper, it actually creates neurogenesis, or the creation of new neural paths within the brain. So that's what we're doing there. We're going along with the client. We're almost like we almost become a factor in the mind of the client. And our role, again, is to sensitively observe and notice what the client is trying to ask for. It's good if the therapist has a wide range of knowledge and experience, so he can recognize the therapeutic need of what the client is asking to do. And we have to be very responsive and interactive in order to co-create the experience with them. I think that's a great word that Richard Hill uses, and I'm using a couple of notes here that he had sent to me in an email, that co-creating, that's how we should think of ourselves, not as someone who is telling the client something or showing him what to do or leading him down a path, but we're working with him to co-create something new. We have to be responsive and interactive. We have to also maximize the clarity of our own thoughts and feelings, and to minimize the amount that we impose upon the client so as not to influence his own natural problem solving. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about activating the client in such a way that he solves his own problem. Because when you think about it, how can we see as therapists into someone else's mind? We can't. We can imagine what a client is feeling or experiencing or wants to experience, but there's no way we can really know what's going on. Only the client knows. And by putting him closer in touch, by acting in a way and working with him in a way that puts him closer in touch with what is going on within himself and helping him to release his inner potentials, we can have things happen that are just miraculous without a great deal of influence from us, but just guidance. I'm thinking of a story now about Erickson that many of you may have heard. I think Lewis Dark, who is with us this evening, has told that story, I remember. So I'm going to retell it in a little different way, the way I remember it. When Erickson was on the farm as a young boy, he was out in the field one day and he noticed a horse coming down the road. He was with his brother. So he went over to that horse and he didn't know who it was, but who owned it. But he told his brother, I'm going to take that horse back to his owner. And he got on the horse and they went down the road, even though he didn't know where he was going. And they went along the road, and every now and then the horse would go over to the side and nibble on some grass and so on and so forth. And then he'd get back on the road and nibble a little more grass. And then an hour or an hour and a half later, they came up in front of a farmhouse that young Erickson had never seen before. And there was a farmer on the porch, and he came running over and said, "There's my horse. That's that horse. I thought that horse got lost. How did you know to bring him back here?" And Erickson said, "I had no idea how to bring him back." And the farmer said, "You didn't? Then how did you get here?" And Erickson said, "I didn't know how to get here, but the horse did. All I did was make sure that he stayed on the road." So we're doing exactly the same thing. Now, mirroring hands also brings to the forefront a recognition of Ultradian rhythms, which is another element here I wanted to touch on because it's very important. We've all heard of circadian rhythms, the 24-hour cycle. Well, there are also cycles that are less than 24 hours that our body goes through, our breathing cycles, even the flickering of our eyes, our heartbeat goes through different cycles. Well, the Ultradian performance rhythm is a 90 to 120 minute rhythm that our bodies go through continually throughout the day. And if you can become aware of your Ultradian rhythm, you can utilize it for problem solving. Because what happens in the Ultradian rhythm is that we go through a period of activity, and then as we reach our peak performance within this 90 or 120 minute time frame, we then begin to feel a bit stressed and we go down into what Rossi called the Ultradian healing response. That is a period of time of about 20 minutes when you really, your body, your mind, body goes into a kind of a natural hypnosis. And that can be utilized to solve problems if you just let yourself rest. Now, in the society that we live in during normal times, as you work in an office or whatever work you're doing, it's kind of hard to do that. And people will generally stop for a cup of coffee, or they'll do something when they start to go into that healing response area. But that is the precise time when, if you can in any way just go and relax for a few minutes, you're going to start to see results in how your life can improve. And this goes constantly throughout the day, 90 to 120 minutes. See, here we up and down, and you can become aware of at what point you are in your ultradian rhythm if you just pause for a moment and observe how you feel. Observation was the key thing for Erickson. Also, somebody once said that Sigmund Freud was a genius of analysis. And then Carl Jung was a genius of synthesis, putting things together. And Erickson was a genius of observation. And it should be sensitive observation, observing very carefully at what point you are in your ultradian rhythm, and also observing your client very sensitively. Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot of material out here, but I just want to cover whatever I can in the time that we're going to spend. Okay, so now we've come through here the little intro about the ultradian rhythms. Now we go to the 4-stage creative cycle, which I'm going to go to another handout now, and then we'll come back to this one and get back to the language principles. So we're going to go back here, and I'm going to get the 4-stage. Can you see the 4-stage cycle? Can you see it there, Don?
No, that
No.
all went away.
Okay, it all went away. Okay, let me try to get back to it here. Share screen, share. I'm kind of new to this. Is it there now?
Yes.
Now it's there. Okay. Here we have the 4-stage creative cycle, which is a universal pattern that underlies creative activity, and it's evident in just about everything that happens to us, from the simulation of gene expression to the very emergence of the universe. Here's what it is in a simple cartoon. There are 4 elements to it. The first is information. Okay, now keep in mind, when you want to create something or do something, solve a problem, whatever it might be, you're going to go through 4 stages, and these 4 stages are evident in particular in the mirroring hands experience, because when people have a problem, they get caught in usually one of these 4 stages. Most often, stage 2. I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, stage 1 is information and data gathering. You're gathering information about whatever a situation is. If it's a personal issue, you're trying to figure out what is going on. Why do you feel depressed? Why are you compulsive? Why are you nervous? You know, whatever it is. So you're trying to get a handle on it. That's in the first phase. Okay. Then you go to the second stage. Stage 2 is the incubation stage. That's when you're trying to work the problem out. You're trying to figure how is this affecting me? What does it mean? What am I running away from? Where's this going? And that can become a merry-go-round. People can remain in stage 2 of a problem for years. Most people, it certainly has applied to me in my life. You get hung up on an issue. You could say, in effect, something's missing. You can't figure it out. And you're going around and around and around and around and around and around. Stage 3 now happens when there's a breakthrough. Ah, ah, now I see why I did that. Something makes sense that didn't make sense before. And with the mirroring hands approach, you can help to bring a person to that point that that breakthrough can take place all by his own regard, not because you're telling him what it is or analyzing his problem or sticking a label on him. But you can bring him to that point, and I'm going to give an example of that. Of a client I was working with recently. It's just exactly how that happened. Finally, stage 4 is verification. Stage 4 is when the experience is reviewed. The person thinks about it. It's, in other words, it sinks in, and he reaches a point where he can actually continue growing from it. Growing as a result of that. He is over it. It's, you know, the memory's there, everything's there, but he is no longer blocked and locked in by the problem. The example I'm going to give now is of a gentleman I worked with that came because he was just very impatient with everything and angry and very frustrated. And even if he was caught in traffic for a few minutes, he would boil over. And if he had to wait for service at a restaurant, he would get so angry. And he was just very upset about, unless everything went exactly his way. And obviously this had an effect on all of his relationships. And he came really at the insistence of his wife, because she had reached a point where she almost couldn't stand to be with him. So we did the mirroring hands. And as we did it, he turned to me. He wasn't saying much. And I remember I gave you a little taste of it. He looked at his hands, and we went through a few things. And he looked at his hands. And then he turned to me at one point and he nodded like that. And I asked him, do you care to share with me what was going on? Is there anything you might want to say about that? And he said, well, yes, I will tell you. As I was doing mirroring hands with you, out of nowhere, just seemed to bubble up from my unconscious were the words, "You are the king." And he says, and then I suddenly understood what was happening with me. And he went on to say that as a child, he had been very pampered, extremely pampered. His mother smothered him and overprotected him. And he was an only child, and the family had a few bucks. And he was just completely filled with the idea that he was very, very special. And the idea became lodged in his mind. It became one of his basic beliefs that he was a king, that he was someone special. And he had been acting that out all of his life. And the more he did it all those years, the worse it became. And he said to me, this in a follow-up meeting, I'm kind of condensing, he said, you know, I knew that my childhood was kind of strange, and I knew that I was spoiled. And I even knew that my mother made me feel like I was a prince or a king, but I never realized it till now. He knew it, but he didn't realize it. Think about that for a moment. I think we can all relate to that. Don't you think so? This is the effect of mirroring hands. He was in a position, he was in a therapeutic consciousness where he could understand that, where his, in effect, his defenses were down. His ego was relaxed a little bit. And he could, and then having understood that, he began the process of change. It was not miraculous. He didn't totally change overnight, but in subsequent conversations, there has been a significant change. Were there any questions up to this point from anyone? Don, maybe you could manage that.
Okay, let me look for hands here. I'll unmute all for a moment, so if somebody wants to speak up, they can do that.
Okay. Here, I'm going to go out of the screen there. I'm back now.
So if somebody has a question, they can speak up now if they wish. Fred has covered everything perfectly, so there's no questions, I guess.
Oh, okay, good. Or maybe I'm overwhelming people with all this stuff. I don't know. Does it seem to make sense to most people?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good.
Yes, it does.
I see where you're going, but you will eventually show us the mirroring hand.
Yeah,
thing.
we're gonna. In fact, we could probably do it right now. This would be a good point to do it now, and I'm going to explain certain things that I'm saying as we're doing it.
So, Fred, I have a question.
Yes. Who's speaking?
Oh, it's Lillian.
Oh,
Flowers.
okay.
So if your client comes to you already knowing, the problem and the solution to the problem, does that mean we all innately have the solution within us and we're just trying to get a means to express it and find it?
That is that's the essence of it. Or you could perhaps modify that slightly and say that if you don't have the complete answer in total, and as a totality, you certainly and absolutely have the equipment within you to figure it out.
All right, thanks. Good,
See,
thank you.
it is there. That's the essential insight of this whole thing.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's do a little mirroring hands now. And all you have to do essentially is hold your hands up. It's so simple in terms of a technique.
Oh, sorry. I just muted Fred.
Okay, am I back?
Fred's back. Yeah, everybody's
Okay.
back. Just sorry.
Okay, I forgive you.
Oh, good.
Maybe I should be muted. I'm talking too much. I started to say that it's a very simple process in terms of a protocol. There is no real protocol. You don't have to go through specific steps except to begin looking at your hands. I mean, maybe before you begin, you might want to take a breath, a deeper breath, and then a shorter breath, and we can all do this together. Deeper breath, and then let it out. Take a shorter breath out. Deep and short, and then reverse that just for the change. Then a short breath and a deep breath out. See, because you don't want to start doing this as soon as someone comes to see you. You want to talk to them. You want to begin that therapeutic consciousness process as soon as they come in the door. And then at the appropriate time, then you hold your hands out at about that level, just as I'm doing. And this is a real mirroring hands now experience. So you look at your hands and you begin to study them very closely. Look at them very closely. Perhaps in a way that you've never looked at them before. Notice the shape of your fingers, your fingernails, the tops of your hands, the veins, and whether you can see the veins or not. And you may notice that as you're doing that, your hands are beginning to move and you become focused. Almost as if they have a life of their own, because the hands and the lips and the mouth and tongue have more nerve endings, more connections to the brain than any other part of the body. So what is going on within you is going to be reflected in your hands. It's going to be mirrored in your hands. And as you just let your mind flow, and you begin to think about an issue that you have, whatever it might be, and you don't have to say what it is. I wonder, when your inner mind is ready to work on that problem, will those hands move together or create an energy of some sort that will be a signal to you that it's time? Now, I'll mention now my hands, I'm feeling a tingling in the palms. And something has come to mind now that is of importance to me that I wasn't really thinking about before, but the opportunity has come up, just as I said, that given the right opportunity, the system will move toward a resolution. And I notice, without me thinking about it, I'll look up, see look how my fingers have moved, and my thumb here is moving. I had someone the other day whose right arm shot out like an arrow, shot out into the way as far back as he could go as he was working on his issue. And this is beginning to happen. And when the inner you is able to begin experiencing different memories, sources, emotions related to your issue, perhaps one hand may drift, and you may find the issue going into one hand, being projected. And this may or may not be your experience, because mirroring hands is unique for every person, completely different. There are no standards. There are only general principles that we follow. There, perhaps your hands will move. So I have some. Perhaps that issue is, or I wonder what could be happening, what I was saying before about wondering, being curious, observing. Now, of course, you as the therapist now will be observing this in your client and responding appropriately. And when we're finished doing this aspect of the experience, I'm going to explain a little bit about that. But for right now, perhaps some of you are feeling something beginning to happen. Maybe when some of those options are coming to mind, maybe your other hand will possibly become a receptacle for a solution. A problem in one hand, a solution in the other. Maybe not. Every situation is completely different, but you can see how focused you are now and how what I'm saying in these comments I'm making are very neutral. And I'm even not using complete sentences necessarily. And I might be using a double bind, an Ericksonian concept of giving someone two options that really lead to the same conclusion. Like, you may be feeling a change taking place now, or it might be happening a few minutes from now. You see, and that leads you to the conclusion of a change taking place. Being focused and letting it happen. In mirroring hands, sometimes you can sit with a person for 10 or 20 minutes with nothing happening. In the sense of language, no one is talking, and the person is having a very profound inner experience. Other times, people will be very talkative. In my own experience with people, they tend not to be particularly talkative. There may be a lot of emotion coming up. They may be crying, laughing, who knows? But we're going along on the trip with them. Now, I'm going back right now to a memory of something that happened today that had a bearing on the issue that I was thinking about. And I'm feeling something that I really can't put into words, but that is helpful to me. And that I'm going to allow my unconscious to work on later, which I'm going to explain that too in a moment. So I wonder if anybody in the group cares to share anything that they've been experiencing. If you would, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
I could share.
Okay. Okay. Who's speaking?
My name's Brian.
Oh, okay, Brian.
Yeah, it's just I was thinking about something that kind of tripped me up today, almost caught me in like a loop of thought. And I noticed my right hand felt like it had a weight to it that was directing my left hand in a sense. And I suddenly became really flustered, like overwhelmed with thought of not even knowing what the problem was. And then it felt like I was like gave it back to my left hand or something along those lines. But I just was really overwhelmed with thought of realizing what was I even causing to be problematic.
So that, go ahead. So that sounds like a stage 2 shift, leaning, going towards stage 3, that awareness developing.
And with something developing, where does I've never experienced something like this, and so where do I let my mind get lost in thought, or am I trying to focus on the problem to get clarity?
Will you just let happen whatever is going to happen and observe it and try to learn from it, but not to necessarily direct it? It depends. You have to go wherever it leads you. See, but from what you're saying, it seems like an awareness has come to you that you didn't quite have before. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, I would.
See, so it's brought this was something that was inside, you could say churning around, and now it's coming to the surface. And this that I was alluding to before, or not alluding, but that we looked at, that 4-stage cycle, you're starting to move through the cycle now. And the answer will come to you in its own time. When you have a mirroring hands session, it doesn't mean that everything is solved right then. It could be. But usually in my own, what I've seen it with myself and with others that I've worked with, it might take a while, but you have to remember that you're going through that 90-minute, 120-minute cycle throughout the day, and each time that you go into the rest cycle, your mind can be working on it, and you won't necessarily be aware of it. If you want to, you can, if you have the opportunity, you can turn it into a little mini session for yourself. But otherwise, your mind can continue working on that if you let it, up and down and up and down. I want to put this other handout on there now.
While you're doing that, Fred, I wanted to mention that if you put up your email, or just tell everybody your email address so they can request the handouts.
Yes, okay. Okay, should I do that right now? I can do that now. I made a little page here. Can you see that page?
Yes.
To contact me? That's my contact information. And I'll leave it up there for a little bit. Below my name, I put in the contact information where you can reach Richard Hill, who wrote the book with Ernest Rossi, and I have a picture here also that I'll put up in a moment. of the book cover. You can get the book online, of course. You know, either you can get a hard copy or you can read it online. And you can also get a lot of information right on his website about mirroring hands that will, I think, clarify a lot of points about it in short order as you read through it. There is a Facebook group about mirroring hands that you can join that Richard operates. And there's a lot of information on there and a number of videos of people experiencing well, actually Richard was demonstrating mirroring hands. But if you even go on YouTube, you can see examples of people doing mirroring hands. Just do a search for mirroring hands. Okay, I'm going to go over to the other, to the book. Can you see the book now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the book, Practitioner's Guide to Mirroring Hands, a Client Responsive Therapy. That's the important thing. The client is the leader. The therapist is a facilitator. And it may sound a little strange to some, but you don't have to know what the problem is even. As long as the client knows where he feels he wants to go, that's all that's important. That kind of threw me for a moment when I first started studying these things, because I thought, how can I be of help to someone if I don't know what's bothering them? Well, I don't have to know. All I have to do is be a sensitive observer and do whatever I can. And it's not easy always. A lot of times there's a tendency that you want to interrupt, you want to interpret something, you want to lead someone in a particular direction, you want to offer your opinion. If he asks for your opinion, okay, you can give him your opinion. But the idea is, let him go where he will go, because his subconscious knows where he needs to go, and the subconscious knows the time frame in which that will take place. I'm looking for something here. Here we go. This is what I wanted. Here's the 4 stages that we were just talking about. And when I mentioned that I believe his name was Brian, if I'm not mistaken. See, he was in there, what it sounded like to me, I don't know, it's just the way it struck me. He was in that incubation stage, and now he's reaching the point up here. And you see how that corresponds to the Ultradian rhythm. He's reaching that crisis stage, period of private inner work and creative replay. Now, as you look at that, can you realize how disastrous it would be if we as this therapist start to interfere with that? We could lead them off in a whole different direction that would sound wonderful, but might be totally counterproductive. So there we go. And then eventually here you come to the illumination, and then you begin to integrate it into your life. Are there any other questions at this point?
Yes, I have a question. I have a
Yes.
question. This is Mr. Vide. I have a question. Is this your go-to technique, Fred, when you deal with clients?
Well, I really don't have a go-to technique. I use it whenever I feel it would be appropriate. But the first thing I do when I talk to a client is we just sit and talk. And I might mention that one of the best ways to get a client into a therapeutic consciousness is by asking him the simple question, what do you like to do? Now, this is an approach that Rob McNeely uses that I mentioned earlier, who had studied with Erickson. He asks the client, what do you like to do? And when you do that, you'll notice a person tends to become very animated because they're going into an empowered state of mind. And then they'll talk about that, what they like, whatever it could be. Sometimes you're very surprised at what they say. And then you follow that up, but you have to listen carefully to what they say. Listen for cues that will lead you along a constructive path. And then you ask them, what is it that you like about that? So a person says, for example, someone I know says she likes to go to hardware stores and look at hardware. So I said, well, what do you like about doing that? And she said, it gives me a feeling of control because I like how all those pipes and screws and who knows, I like how they're all useful and you can use them to make things. And I could see a change in her whole face and her body posture as she talked. At that point, I felt I had just had a feeling, an intuitive feeling, that this might be a good time for mirroring hands. So I said, okay, now here, raise your hands up and have a look at them. Look at them very closely, just like I said now when we were doing that. Look at them perhaps in a way that you've never looked at them before. See, and she was primed and ready to go. So I didn't intend to do that, but I felt that it would be useful. And if I hadn't done that, we might have just continued talking. Now, Rob McNeely's approach is then to, when the person is proceeding, is then to ask them, well, what seems to be missing then in this situation? What do you like to do? Why do you like it? And what's missing about the issue that you have? And then there's several other things, and that's just a general protocol. And, he will ask, well, when you had a situation like that, how did you handle it previously? Something that might be like it. Or he asks this question also, which is quite extraordinary and really can throw a person can really throw them into a different good frame of mind. Well, how is liking to look at hardware, how is that like what your problem is? Let's say the person's problem is anxiety. How is looking at hardware, how is that like feeling anxious? That can lead to some incredible things, these simple questions, all based on observation. So I'm kind of getting far afield from your question about whether it's my go-to technique, it's something that I always have in my mind and that I found very useful a lot of the time. That's how I would put it. I don't
If I could,
yeah.
If I could ask another question,
Yeah.
could you talk about how this contrasts with ideomotor type techniques like a Bob Burns, the Swan, things like that, where you're looking at a finger moving, stuff like that? It seems like it's more free form.
Yeah, this is very, very free form. I'm not really extremely familiar with the techniques you mentioned, though I've heard from them. But an essential element of this is that it's free form. It's designed to give your subconscious, you could say, an opportunity to go where it wants to go and may have felt inhibited to go there before or didn't know how. You're opening the gate and saying go.
Fred, to what extent is the talking that goes with this scripted? And how much of it is improvised and how much of it is case by case?
Well, that's a very excellent question. And I would say we're going to take a look here at this other, let's see here. Going to look here, the language principles of mirroring hands. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
It's on there now? Okay. I'm just going to go over this very briefly. You're using incomplete sentences, which does allow for a free form response. You might say to someone they're moving their hands in a certain way and doing something, and you notice maybe something that you might say, are you, and leave it at that. Or is this, might that, can you, would you, see? This lets the person fills that in himself. So it's not scripted. There might be certain guidelines, and this is all gone into quite a bit of detail in the book. It's a great book. It starts out very, very basic, and then it goes into deeper and deeper stuff on a theoretical level. And you're ending up with quantum physics and all that sort of great stuff that Don is so good at. He's our resident quantum physicist. So who was it that said, a famous physicist said that whoever claims that he understands quantum physics doesn't understand it. It can't be understood. But so you're doing that. You're using supportive responses. That's good. That's good. Wonderful. Wonderful. Interesting. Blah, 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 blah. You're maintaining a high level of energy. Sometimes double binds help a person, like I mentioned before. The basic accessing question is a three parts to it. Well, like a post-hypnotic suggestion is usually like a basic access where you tell someone you want something, you give them a certain amount of time to do it in, and then you're looking for a certain response. You know, the next time you feel anxious, you can do that. You can tap your nose, and then you'll feel better. 3 parts. They go into a lot of detail on that in the book that I don't have to go into right now. But this is the essence of the whole thing. I hope that answered your question, Louis. Does it?
I would like to, is there a basic outline of the pattern? Is there is there a guidance in the book?
Well, there's guidance of things to keep in mind, put it that way, but there is no protocol.
Okay.
There's no specific protocol. That's what's so hard. And even Richard Hill, when I told him I was going to, well, not the talk tonight, but I told him that we're going to do it at the hypnosis conference, he said, well, you know, you have your work, I'm paraphrasing him, you have your work cut out for you because this is very difficult to get across since there's not a specific pattern that you follow. It's in an, I would express it as an approach. Reminds me of the joke about the Scotsman who saw a locomotive for the first time when the locomotives first came out in the 1700s or early 1800s. He said, well, yeah, it works in practice, but does it work in theory?
Ha 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 ha.
Like that?
I rather do.
Would you say that this would include all the senses then?
Well, not necessarily all the senses, but it includes the senses. Because Rossi's focus is on mind-body.
Okay.
Hill and Rossi, the book is encouraging you to be intuitive, it sounds like.
Would you repeat it? There was a little distortion there. I didn't get the whole thing.
Sorry about that. I was thinking that Hill and Rossi are encouraging the therapist to be, I just had it.
Intuitive.
Intuitive.
Yes. Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, you don't want to get locked into a particular solution for a particular problem. See, in its purest sense here, there's no diagnosis, there's no treatment, there's no labeling.
Can I ask, when you do this, do you do this mirroring and then do you do a hypnosis session, or do you just do the mirroring, or do you combine the two together?
Well, that's a good question too, because looking at your hands that way, that is a hypnotic induction. As you focus on that, you're excluding other thoughts. It fulfills all of the requirements of a hypnotic induction. So it really is hypnosis, and it's something that can apply to your whole life. In fact, the Mirroring Hands group on Facebook, I think it's subtitled Mirroring Hands, a Practice or a Way of Being. See, having that feeling of, well, everything that would be in the, being in that special state of consciousness. Is it a practice or a way of being? It's very hard to put in words sometimes. So I hope I'm at least getting the essence of it across.
I hope I'm not being too personal, but do you use this method on a daily basis, Fred?
I use it whenever I can. I certainly use it on myself. It has helped me with different things that have been of concern to me. So I do use it all the time, and I try to maintain that way of being.
Great. Thank you.
That kind of openness.
So, Fred, this is something that in part of the practice of this is to teach your clients to take this and use it in everyday life or as they need to.
Yeah.
It's sort of like we teach self-hypnosis to our clients to help them go off and do whatever they need to do. So it's an empowering technique.
Yeah.
It's simple and free-flowing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's an empowering
Fred?
technique. Yes.
Fred, I have a question. When would you have a follow-up session with your client after doing one of these techniques?
I would have a follow-up, usually just like and this is not necessarily how to do it. I would do a phone call a couple of days later just to see how things are going.
To see
And
if
then,
they had any,
hmm?
to see if they've had any progress or they had any realizations and.
Or yeah, or if they had any questions or anything.
Right.
But again, it would be very informal. I wouldn't schedule another session. You know, one of the things also, and Richard Hill talks about this, a typical session that you have with a client is an hour or so. And I'm sure you may have noticed that sometimes as you're getting right to the end of that hour, that's when the client is just starting to do some real work. Right? So
Right.
Richard Hill says he schedules actually an hour and a half. He's got that extra time. He doesn't book them one after another. You know, he books them one after another, but not, you know, he allows an hour and a half.
Erickson would block 4 hours open for any new patient.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
At least after he went into private practice, he would, if he finished early, fine, but he could never go overtime.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's pretty good. That is good. Okay, well, I think, well, what I'm reminded of now is a story about where Frank Sinatra was with Pavarotti one time. And he said to Pavarotti, "Maestro, I have a question. Sometimes when I come to the end of a song and I have that final note there and I don't know how to end. I don't know what should I do when I get to that final note?" And Pavarotti said to him, "Frank, you close your mouth." And that's how I feel right now. I think I'm going to close my mouth.
Fred, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Answer with side language, Fred.
Huh?
It's Kate. It's Kate. And about the Ultradian performance rhythm.
Yeah.
As you were talking about that, I was imagining myself back at my last full-time job and thinking about how that would work during your day at work and how you could use that while you're at work to be more creative in problem solving or what have you, or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great question too. Well, just if there's any opportunity that you have where you're feeling that energy go into that level there, into that healing response level, you could even go to the bathroom for a few minutes. Or if you could just turn away from what you're doing for a few moments, anything you can possibly do, and I know it's not always possible, but you do whatever you can when you can.
I know that when I attended art school, it was traditional to work in the studio for half an hour, and then you took a half-hour break while the model warmed up and put her clothes back on, and then you went back to work for another 90 minutes. You broke for lunch, then you came back at 1, and again, you worked for 90 minutes. You took a break for half an hour, and then you finished at 4:30 or 5. And so many of the instinctive structures of society are based around this, you know, the hour as the basic work unit, the unit of 7 workers or 7 soldiers as a basic unit, the break time after 90 minutes, and even the breakup of the day into work, rest, and sleep into sort of 3 thirds, you know, of 8 hours each. So, and I know that Erickson, not Erickson so much, but Rossi was very in his writings was very emphatic about ultradian rhythms. This was the time that the first, biofeedback and life cycle, biological cycle research was being done, to the point where he insisted that the best hypnosis was done at 11 in the morning and 7 in the evening. I have been trying to test that out of late, but never proven it.
Yeah, that sounds like it's possible, but again, you work with what you have and you do what you can, like was it Theodore Roosevelt said, you do what you can with what you've got where you are. That's one of my favorite sayings.
Amen.
So are there any other questions? Because that would conclude what I wanted to present this evening. I hope you feel it was worth your while.
Fascinating.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very
Thank
enlightening.
you, Fred.
Yes, it was very
You're
good.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to put it on record that Fred explored an entire area of Ericksonian therapy that I was completely ignorant of. Thank you, Fred.
Oh, yeah. I should mention there's the book is really great. Richard also has a 6-hour introductory video that is a wonderful complement to the book. You can find that on the information, the details on the website. But I just feel that this mirroring hands thing is a wonderful, marvelous breakthrough for people who want to improve their lives in terms of how they feel and how they act and how they're able to do what they want to do in life. There's just a wealth of material out there on that, and mirroring hands. I think the book was written in 2016, and it does seem to be catching on because Richard Hill has been doing talks in many different countries, but now, of course, that's on hold because of the current situation.
Yeah. So this would be the point where David comes forward with the certificate of appreciation and presenting that to Fred, and then there's a round of applause and everybody's happy and we finish up. But because we are at this point with the Zoom, I don't have one to hand to David to hand to Fred. So we'll get it to Fred later. But we are very much appreciative of his efforts tonight and sharing with all of us. It's always interesting when there's another door that opens on how we can do our work better for our clients, and this is a way that we can help our clients do better for themselves. It's how we could be the facilitator and just kind of guide them along and help them empower themselves. And it's a very powerful technique here, and I'm glad that Fred was able to bring it forth for us. So thank you much, Fred. Also, are there any other? There's another question. This was great, Don. Thank you. Sounds great. Well, we hope everybody will be able to tune in next month, same time, and on what day?
So it's on Tuesday, May 12th.
The second Tuesday of the month. So it always is. And where are we meeting? We are meeting at the Leaning Tower Y, just like it shows right here. and your living rooms. Thank you so much all for coming. And that'll be it for tonight. We'll see you next month. I think we've got that's a hand clapping. There's a hand clapping that came up. I'm still figuring this out. So thanks again. I wish you all well. Keep safe, and we'll learn all about being healthier and safer next month too. So all is good. Keep smiling. We're all here. Thanks.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you again for doing this and going through the trouble.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was very good, Fred. Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done, Fred.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you all.
you so much.
Fred. Thank you.